بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الغرر الميامين، سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين، سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا، مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة، الحجة بن الحسن العسكري، فداه أرواح العالمين. For the hastening of the reappearance of the Master, the Savior, the Avenger, as well as for our deeds to be accepted and for our supplications to be raised, with those of the Imam of our time, recite a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In these remaining days of the holy month of Ramadan, it is natural to feel saddened and also remorseful. You see, the holy month of Ramadan is a great metaphor for life in general. When you're young, you feel like you have your whole life ahead of you. There's plenty of time to do good, plenty of time to correct the path. But then, in what feels like a blink of an eye, life comes to a close. The holy month of Ramadan is the same. When it starts, it does so with fanfare and excitement. But then, after only a blink of an eye, it comes to an end. To talk about how we can take advantage of the holy month of Ramadan beyond this month. And to do that, I refer you back to the sermon of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, which was delivered on the last Friday before the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan, the last Friday of Sha'ban. A sermon that is often recited from the pulpits by scholars and speakers before we set out on this blessed month. How does the Prophet describe the month of Ramadan? We will use that in order to lay out a plan for the future. Listen carefully. The Holy Messenger of Allah said, "Ayyuhan nas, O people, قَدْ أَقْبَلَ إِلَيْكُمْ شَهْرُ اللَّهِ." The month of Allah has approached you. بِالْبَرَكَةِ وَالرَّحْمَةِ وَالْمَغْفِرَةِ. It has approached you with blessings, mercy, and forgiveness. شهر دعيتم فيه إلى ضيافة الله وجعلتم فيه من أهل كرامته. It's a month in which you have been invited to the banquet of Allah. God is the host and we are the guests. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has laid out the tablecloth with the best things that we could imagine. What are they? The Prophet refers to a few of the most important blessings of the month of Ramadan. Number one, he says, أَنفَاسُكُمْ فِيهِ تَسْبِيحٌ. Every breath that you take in this blessed month and in the last remaining few days that we have is an act of exaltation. It's a means of tasbih, meaning you glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With every exhalation and every inhalation, you're glorifying Allah. You are rewarded simply for breathing. Number one. Number two, the Prophet says, not only are your breaths acts of worship and exaltation, وَنَوْمُكُمْ فِيهِ عِبَادَةٌ. And when you sleep, that is considered an act of worship toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 3, وَعَمَلُكُمْ فِيهِ مَقْبُولٌ. And your actions, your deeds are accepted. And number 4, وَدُعَاؤُكُمْ فِيهِ مُسْتَجَابٌ. Your prayers, your supplications are answered. Now let's take these 4 items, these 4 blessings, and see what we can do with them. How we can use them as a catapult in order to progress beyond the holy month of Ramadan and reach nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that possible? The answer is yes. And I'll provide some notes and some tips and that you can all use. Simple things that we can do in order to take advantage of this. Shortcuts that allow us to take the blessings of the holy month of Ramadan and stretch them throughout the year. However, it's difficult. While they're simple, it's difficult given that in the holy month of Ramadan, everything was put right in front of us. It was made available to us and accessible to us. When the Holy Prophet, for instance, says, نَوْمُكُمْ فِيهِ عِبَادَةٌ. Think of the fact that when we sleep, we are doing nothing but wasting our precious time in this world. Nothing. A man by the name of Abdullah ibn Jundab came to our 6th Imam and asked him for advice. The Imam said to him, Ya ibn Jundab, إِيَّاكَ وَالنَّوْمِ. Don't oversleep. Why? Because when you oversleep, you are wasting your time in this world, which is a place of trial, a place of working towards the akhirah. Notice the hadith. The Imam says to him, Ya ibn Jundab, أَقِلَّ النَّوْمَ بِاللَّيْلِ وَالْكَلَامَ بِالنَّهَارِ. Try and reduce the amount of sleep you have in the night time and the amount of speech in the daytime. Why? فَمَا فِي الْجَسَدِ شَيْءٌ أَقَلَّ شُكْرًا مِنَ الْعَيْنِ وَاللِّسَانِ. Because the 2 least grateful organs in your body are your eyes and your tongue. What is the Imam saying? He's saying that compared to all of the other organs, we dedicate and devote so much to the eye, giving it what it wants, allowing it to sleep and to rest. You know, they say, a euphemism for going to sleep is I want to get some shut-eye, right? I want to rest my eyes. So you allow your eyes to rest and to enjoy sleeping for these many hours, and yet what does the eye give back to you? It doesn't reciprocate. It's not thankful. It's not grateful. Compared to all the energy and time and devotion that you give it, how much does it give you back? And the same is for the tongue. You allow it to roam freely. You allow it to say whatever it wants. You engage in vain and meaningless and purposeless conversations. But how much does your tongue give back to you? Not much. The Imam says, فَلَيْسَ فَمَا فِي الْجَسَدِ شَيْءٌ أَقَلَّ شُكْرًا مِنَ الْعَيْنِ وَاللِّسَانِ فَإِنَّ أُمَّ سُلَيْمَانَ. The Imam then mentions an example. He says to him that the mother of Sulaiman, meaning the biblical Solomon, the king, the mother of Sulaiman used to tell her son, إِيَّاكَ وَالنَّوْمِ يَا بُنَيْ. Oh son, don't sleep too much. Why? فَإِنَّهُ يُفَقِّرُكَ يَوْمَ يَحْتَاجُ النَّاسُ إِلَىٰ أَعْمَالِهِمْ. Because on the day of judgment, oversleeping makes you poor. On a day you need your actions. Your deeds will be your currency. Your deeds will be the thing with which you buy an eternity in paradise. But here you've squandered your time by sleeping, and you have nothing to offer, nothing to show for it on the day of judgment. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam, he quotes Prophet Musa, who asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, Ya Rabbi, man abghadul ibadi ilayk? Who are the most detested slaves in your eyes? The ones that you don't like. Abghadul ibad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replied, Jifatun fil layl, one who is like a cadaver in the night, sleeps throughout the whole night, and oversleeps in fact. This person is like a cadaver, like a corpse. Jifatun bil layl, battalun bin nahar. And in the daytime, he also squanders his time, wastes his time on meaningless, vain things. Brothers and sisters, today, doctors say that the non-negotiable time for sleeping that every person needs in order to lead a healthy life is how many hours a night? They say it's 8 hours. If we only sleep for 8 hours, which is the recommended amount of sleeping that we need, imagine how much time we've wasted. Because our lives are composed into, broadly speaking, into 3 sections. The first quarter, we're but children. We lack knowledge, we lack energy, we don't know what we're doing, we're confused, we're just children. So there's not much happening in the way of the afterlife in that quarter. In the last quarter, we are old and frail. We are subject to the science of geriatrics, which means that there isn't much we can do. When we could go to ziyarah, for instance, standing on our 2 feet, full of energy and vibrancy, we don't do that. We wait until we're old, and then we need people to carry us and to help us and to put us and push us around in wheelchairs. When you're at that age, you can't do much in the way of securing your afterlife. The prayers that you could perform when you were young, all the good deeds that you could do by helping others and whatnot, you can't do these in the last quarter of your life. Which means what? We're left only with the middle. And the middle, if we spend 1/3 of that on sleeping 8 hours a day, and another 1/3 on all the other things that we engage in, like eating, like resting, like going on vacations, like working. Imagine all of this, how much time does it take away from us? And how much are we left with? So you see why Allah says to the Prophet, وَأَنذِرْهُمْ يَوْمَ الْحَسْرَةِ إِذْ قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ. Warn them, O Prophet of Allah, of the day of remorse and regret, because it's all over now. So, this is a problem. In the holy month of Ramadan, by the grace and blessings and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, you know what? Even the time you spend sleeping, because you are my guests, because you have accepted my invitation, because you have arrived at my banquet, even this will be considered an act of worship. Now, can this be replicated? Can we try and stretch this blessing beyond the holy month of Ramadan? The answer is, yes, we can. There are tips that I'll share with you. Some of you are familiar with these, some others perhaps not. The first one, hadiths tell us, a famous tradition by the Holy Prophet who says that if you go to bed in a state of purity and wudu, man dhahaba ila nawmihi ala wudu, the Prophet says, kana nawmuhu ibadah. When he or she sleeps, that will be considered an act of worship. وَفِرَاشُهُ صَلَاةٌ. It's as if you have spent the night in prayer. And if one goes to sleep, the Prophet says, not in a state of purity, what happens is, the Prophet says that كَانَ فِرَاشُهُ قَبْرًا. Your bed will be like your grave. You can't do much. You're not being rewarded for this. So, do wudu. Introduce this ritual, this act, to your evening routine. A lot of people have a routine. Just like you have trained yourself into the habit of brushing your teeth before you go to bed. Also do wudu. If you take a shower before you go to bed, do ghusl. Do ghusl for the intention of doing ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Once you've done the ghusl, then simply say, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu alayka wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, as the hadith says. Right? You have done ghusl, number one. You have done ziyarah, number two. And number three, you're also in a state of purity that you can go to bed with and have your sleep count towards acts of worship. That's one example. The other example, or the other shortcut that we can take in order to stretch the blessings of the holy month of Ramadan and make our sleep acts of worship and be rewarded for those, is to recite Tasbihatul Zahra before you go to bed. Very simple. Something that we've all accustomed to doing after Salah. The hadith recommends Tasbihatul Zahra before going to bed as well. The Imam then says that if you do that, كَانَ مِنَ الذَّاكِرِينَ وَالذَّاكِرَاتِ, you will be counted among the ones who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be it a man or a woman. The other example is we have a hadith, and there are many such traditions. The problem is we simply don't acquaint ourselves with these traditions. We lack, unfortunately, the keys to these shortcuts. If we knew them, imagine someone who takes a path to work every day, but then 5 years down the line finds a shortcut and realizes that instead of taking 20 minutes or 30 minutes for him to get to work, there is a way that takes him to work in 10 minutes or 5 minutes. You see the remorse that we could experience after that? The regret? I wish I knew this before. Well, here you have a chance, brothers and sisters. That's why it's important to read the books of dua, like Mafatihul Janan. Read it from beginning to end. Even if it's 2 pages a day. You read the du'as, but you also familiarize yourself with these shortcuts. So take this hadith. The Imam says that if before going to bed every night, you read the following verse, which is what? He says, فَسُبْحَانَ Praise be to Allah, exalted is Allah. حَيْنَ تُمْسُونَ وَحَيْنَ تُصْبِحُونَ وَلَهُ الْحَمْدُ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ عَشِيًّا وَحَيْنَ تُظْهِرُونَ. If you read this 3 times before going to bed, the Imam says that any good that could happen on that night, you will be a recipient of that good. And any evil that could occur on that night will be repelled from you. And if you say this same verse, if you recite the verse in the morning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring you any good that might happen on that day, and He will repel away from you any evil that could also transpire. It's a verse in the Quran, look it up, write it down, memorize it. If not, keep it on your phone and read it before you go to bed, as I said, as part of your evening routine. Because at the end of the day, Amir al-Mu'mineen famously declares, Al-'adatu tab'un than. When you get into the habit of something, it becomes second nature to you. Tab' means nature. Than means second. In English, they say, this is second nature to me, meaning that I do it compulsively. I do it without thinking. If you get into the habit of something, and that's one of the blessings of the holy month of Ramadan, if you are now in the habit of reciting the Holy Quran, maintain this habit, because it's now much easier than it was before. It's second nature to you. فسبحان حين تمسون وحين تصبحون وله الحمد في السماوات والأرض وعشيا وحين تظهرون. Also, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, نوم على يقين خير من صلاة على شك. If you have certainty, and this is a whole other subject that we can talk about some other time, but if you have certainty and you go to bed, that is better than sleeping while you have a nagging doubt. Which is why, brothers and sisters, if you have any misconceptions, if you have any questions that are nagging you about matters of religion, make sure you resolve those. Make sure that you have certainty in your matters of creed, in your beliefs. And that requires you to gain knowledge. It means that you have to refer to learned scholars and ask them those questions. Present your doubts to them. Have the doubts clarified. نوم على يقين خير من صلاة في شك. The Imam also says, اليقين عبادة. Being in a state of certainty is an act of worship in itself. You're always worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because you don't have any doubts. You are absolutely, positively certain about the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, prophethood, imamah, ma'ad, adl, all of these important matters of belief. Ensure that you rid yourself and cleanse yourself from any misconceptions or doubts. So, the Prophet then says, in the same sermon that we recited, we talked about sleep and how we can stretch the blessings of the holy month of Ramadan beyond this month and make our sleeps, transform them into acts of worship. The second thing the Prophet says is what? He says, وَعَمَلُكُمْ فِيهِ مَقْبُولٌ. Your acts, your deeds are accepted. Brothers and sisters, that's a big deal. Why? Because we don't know which of our actions are accepted, do we? Traditions say that if people could see all of the actions that are rejected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sent back to sender, they would assume that no action is being accepted. All the things that people do around the world, all the charity, all the philanthropy, all the billions of dollars that are given by these billionaires and wealthy individuals around the world, not accepted by Allah. For one reason or another. Either because they did it to get their 15 minutes of fame, not for Allah, or because it was tainted or blemished or stained in some way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't accept them. In the holy month of Ramadan, the Holy Prophet is telling us that here your actions are accepted. Even if they're stained with things that might render them unacceptable, Allah will accept them. They might be flawed, He will accept them. He's invited you to this banquet. So number one, let's use these last remaining days. If you're going to give sadaqah, do so in the holy month of Ramadan because you can guarantee acceptance. If you're going to help a family member who is in need, then do so in these last remaining days of the holy month. If you're going to pick up a good habit, if you're going to read a dua, if you're going to perform a prayer, if you're going to reconcile between brothers and sisters within the community of the lovers of the Ahlulbayt, if you're going to reconnect with a family member that you have disconnected from, do all of these in the holy month of Ramadan. It's the best opportunity. Imagine sometimes we have a falling out with a family member or a brother because even if they're not related to you by blood, traditions tell us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not accept the act of worship of two believers who are not speaking to each other if this disconnection lasts more than 3 days. 3 days is understandable. You were angry, you were upset, he or she said something, and so for 3 days, while you give yourself time to calm down and to cool off, that's fine. But after 3 days, you're not allowed to disconnect from a believing brother or sister, meaning that you refuse to speak to them, you refuse to say salam to them. And so this is not confined only to members of the same family. But sometimes what happens, and I'm sure you can relate to this, you wish to correct this. You want to reconnect with that individual, but you feel ashamed. Or you feel like if I go to them and if I ask them or say salam to them, they'll assume that I am regretting my actions. And so they'll feel emboldened in their stance towards me. What do we do? The best thing you can do, brothers and sisters, number one, set arrogance aside. This isn't about pride. This isn't about your standing in the community. This is about you doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. feeling a little embarrassed or ashamed, or feeling as though you are the one who was wrong even though you think you were right. All these things pale in comparison to the objective that you have, which is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not that person. Number one. Number two, use these last few days, because it's customary and traditional for people to say to each other, forgive me if I've ever wronged you. It's the holy month of Ramadan. Maybe you could forgive me. This is acceptable. This won't be seen as concession on your part. It won't tarnish your reputation or somehow taint your pride in any way. Simply go up to them and say, I am sorry if I've ever wronged you, if I've ever done something to upset you, forgive me. I hope we can forgive each other and start with a clean slate. So, the actions that we perform in the month of Ramadan are accepted and amplified and given this massive boost. But then what happens after the holy month? Remember one thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. How do we ensure our actions are accepted by Allah? You have to be pious. You have to have taqwa in your heart. Meaning you have to fear Allah. You have to fear the fires of hell. And as a result, refrain from actions that would invoke the wrath of Allah. As a result, make a conscious decision that if I've committed a certain sin in the past, I will stop doing it moving forward. That shows that there is taqwa in your heart. It shows that you fear Allah and His position of authority. If you do that, then your actions will be accepted. Because He said in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. He will accept your actions from you. And that also means you have to strengthen this sense of taqwa. You have to ensure that every day that you are a more pious person than you used to be in the previous day. Amir al-Mu'mineen famously says, مَنْ تَسَاوَى يَوْمَهُ فَهُوَ مَغْبُونٌ. If today and yesterday I am at the exact same position, then I am at a loss, I'm a loser. وَمَنْ كَانَ آخِرُ يَوْمَيْهِ شَرُّهُمَا. And if the second day, if the subsequent day, I am worse than I was yesterday, فَهُوَ مَلْعُونٌ. Then I am cursed and I'm cast out and driven from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm getting worse. I am getting progressively worse than I used to be. I'm sure you've heard people say that when I was young, I was so much better than I am today. When I was 15 and 16, I just became baligh. I would do all these good deeds. Well, there's a problem there, brothers and sisters. Yes, when you're young, you're more energetic and you're more vibrant and you have all this enthusiasm. And so a part of this is acceptable. But to say that I used to refrain from sin before, but now I don't care, this means that I'm being cast out of the mercy of Allah. Listen to this hadith in the blessed book of Al-Kafi by Shaykh Muhammad ibn Yaqub al-Kulayni. May Allah elevate his ranks and raise him with the Ahlulbayt on the Day of Judgment. In his book Al-Kafi, he narrates a hadith which says that when a person deliberately commits a sin, I'm paraphrasing the hadith, when a person doesn't care about the consequences or repercussions of transgressions against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does Allah do to him? Punish him? Destroy him? No. An'am Allahu alayhi. Allah gives him blessings. Allah gives him more. He gets that raise at work that he's been craving and been begging his boss for. He gets more money out of nowhere, out of the blue. Suddenly things start to work out in his life. Why? Because this is part of a tradition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or what I'd like to refer to as a meta law called Sunnatul Istidraj. It's when Allah progressively pushes you away from His mercy by occupying us with good things, with pleasure, with enjoyment, with happiness, so that we turn away from Him. So try and strengthen your sense of piety and God consciousness Every day strive to be better than the previous day. You might be familiar with the story of this elderly woman who used to live in Nayshabur. The Shia of Nayshabur got together and said that after Imam al-Sadiq, we don't know who the subsequent Imam is. And that presents two problems. The first problem is that you have to know the Imam of your time. Man mata la ya'rif imam zamanihi mata mitatan jahiliyyah. If you're alive and you don't know the Imam of your time, then you die a death of ignorance, as though you died in the time of the Jahiliyyah. So that's the first problem. We need to investigate. We need to find out. Number two, we have alms and khums and zakat and what we call huquq shar'iyyah that are mandated by our religion, which have to be paid to the Imam. What do? They decided to send an envoy, someone who would go from Nayshabur to Medina to investigate who the living Imam was and to deliver all of these funds to him. So the Shia get together, they pay all of their alms, all of their obligations to an individual who was trustworthy and knowledgeable. He was their envoy. They give all of this to him. The hadith says that he got so much money. Back in those days, commodities were also precious and expensive, and so they represented money. And some of the Shia came and gave him herbs. They gave him textiles and fabrics and silks and things like that, including gold and silver. So they put all of these things on the back of camels, which filled God knows how many dozens of camels. As he was about to depart and leave Nayshabur, he was approached by an elderly woman named Shatiqa. This woman came to him. She said to him, I also have some khums I'd like to deliver to my Imam. He said, I'm about to leave, give it to me. So she gave him a part of a coin. In other words, whatever the currency of the day was, let's say a tiny coin made of silver, perhaps. But it wasn't even a full coin. It was broken and bent. And a handkerchief. She said, this is my khums. This man looked at her and said, what is this? Can't you see all the money I'm taking? I have big fat checks and you're giving me this so I could deliver it to the Imam? I'm too ashamed to take it to him. إِنِّي لَأَسْتَحْيِي مِنْ ذَلِكَ. She said to him, oh, envoy of the people of Nayshabur, Wallahu la yastahi min al-haq. She recited a verse in the Quran. You can't be ashamed because Allah is not ashamed of that which is true, the truth. This is the truth. I have to give my khums. And Allah is not ashamed of that. I'm not ashamed of it. So he took it from her and set out for the holy city of Medina. When he arrived in Medina, first he went to the Imam's brother who had also claimed to be the vicegerent and successor of Imam al-Sadiq. He asked him a few questions. He felt uncomfortable. And that's something the Shia did. The Shia would investigate. Some people try to play this game, right? I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but this is important. Some people nowadays, they've emerged, a bunch of man-childs who say that, look, the Imama of the Ahlulbayt is not something that was as clear-cut back in the time of the Imams as it is today. There were plenty of people who claimed to be Imam, and some people followed them. In other words, what they're trying to suggest that now, the fact that we follow these specific divinely appointed vicegerents of Allah and the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt is an accident of history. We just happen to follow these Imams because our forefathers, our ancestors followed these particular Imams. Otherwise, instead of Imam Al-Kadhim, we would have followed Ismail, for instance, or Abdullah al-Aftah. We would have followed any other Imam. What these children... So, this man went to Medina. First, he went to Abdullah al-Aftah. He asked him a few questions. Remember, this was the son of Imam al-Sadiq. He asked him a question. He wasn't comfortable with the response. He asked him another question, and then a third question, and he wasn't at all satisfied by the responses he was getting. Then Abdullah al-Aftah said to him, give me the money that you brought with you. At this point, he felt, hang on a second, this doesn't add up. This is not how the Ahlulbayt acted, where he gives these unsatisfactory answers to my queries, and then all he's interested in is in the money. He said, no, I'm sorry, I didn't bring any money with me from Nayshabur, and he left. He went, and while he was in the masjid of Rasulullah, this black slave came to him. He said, you've come from Nayshabur, and you'd like to visit your Imam. He said, yes, by Allah, I did. So he said to him, come with me, follow me. And he took him to Imam al-Sadiq. When he went to visit the Imam al-Kadhim, when he took him to the Imam, he asked him a few questions. The Imam immediately responded. Not only that, the Imam said to him, you have brought with you questions from Nayshabur in the form of scrolls. You know how they used to roll the letters back then? These are scrolls, and they've been sealed with candle wax. So if you break the seal, you can tell that it's been opened. He said, yes, by God, I have brought these questions. The Imam said to him, go back to your questions and you'll find the answers written on the same sheets of paper. He said, I went, I broke the seal, I opened the scrolls, and sure enough, the answers were written just underneath them. I knew this was my Imam. This was my master. So then I went to him. I said, Ya ibn Rasulullah, Sayyidi wa Mawlai, I have brought with you many riches. I've brought gold and silver and fabrics and herbs and spices. The Imam said to him, I want none of that. Give me what Shatita gave. That's all I want from you. Then the Imam recited the same verse that Shatita had recited. He said to him, Wallahu la yastahi min al-haq. Allah is not ashamed. I know what Shatita gave was only a small amount. It's negligible, it's nothing. You wouldn't give it to the poor. But give me that. Because what Shatita gave you was pure and in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas all the other money that you brought was contaminated in one way or another. Maybe there was illicit funds involved. Maybe the money that was used to acquire this wealth wasn't entirely pure. So send it all back. I want no part of this. Just give me what Shatita gave you. Then the Imam took a shroud and he gave it to this man. Subhanallah, brothers and sisters, how grateful and thankful our Imams are. You do a small deed in their way, look at what they do as they reciprocate the favor. They go above and beyond. So he gave him this shroud. He said, go and send my salam to Shatita. Number one. Number two, give her this shroud and tell her that in a short period of time you're going to die. The Imam gave him a time frame, a few weeks or a few months. He said, go give this to her and tell her that this is my gift. This is a shroud, a kafan that I am giving to her. And tell her that my aunt was the one who sewed it. She's the one who prepared it. Allahu Akbar. The man took the shroud, went back to Shatita. The hadith describes in detail the encounter between him, between the Nayshaburi and Shatita. When he said to her that the Imam conveys his salam upon you, she cried and said, who am I to receive the salam of Musa ibn Ja'far? Then he gave her the shroud. He told her when she would die. He told her that the Imam wants you to put your affairs together and prepare yourself for death. So, إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنْهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. When you do something good, do so with piety and sincerity, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will also accept your deeds. The Prophet then says, I go back to the sermon of Rasulullah. Again, we're trying to find shortcuts to stretch out the blessings of this month. He says, وَدُعَاءُكُمْ فِيهِ مُسْتَجَابٌ. Your prayers in this holy month are answered. What do we do to ensure that our prayers are answered? First of all, A hadith by our sixth Imam says, من أراد أن إذا سأل الله أو ما سأل الله شيئا إلا أعطاه. If you wish to be one of those who, whenever they ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah always gives them what they need. Imagine if you were like this. Mustajabu da'wah. Your prayers were always answered. What's the key to this? What do? Listen to the hadith. إذا أراد أحدكم ألا يسأل الله شيئا إلا أعطاه فلييأس من الناس كلهم. You should despair on everyone. In other words, don't hang your hope on anyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't rely on anyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you're in need, turn to Him and no one else. Don't ask people for favors. We, brothers and sisters, have an insatiable desire. And because our desires are insatiable, we always want to find ways to satisfy it. And so we live beyond our means. We always want more. And because we always want more, we have no choice but to plead with others, to ask others, to take out loans, to ask for favors. Scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. All of this culture is grounded in the fact that we don't trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us. We put our reliance on other people. Notice Amir al-Mu'mineen one day, he's going toward his house. On the way back, he walks past the butcher. The butcher says to him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I have fresh meat. Come and take some of this meat. The Imam said to him, Laysa andi thaman. I don't have the money to buy meat. Allahu Akbar. Amir al-Mu'mineen. At a time when he was the emperor, the king, the leader of the entire Muslim nation. As I said, 50 of today's countries were part of his dominion. Ali ibn Abi Talib doesn't have enough money to buy meat. In fact, traditions say that the Imam only ate meat once a year on Eid al-Adha, Qurban, because he said that I know every Muslim has had some meat today. That's the only time he had meat, when he was the Khalifa. Let the world hear this, brothers and sisters. Let politicians and governments hear about Ali ibn Abi Talib so they could bow their heads down in shame. So the Imam says to the butcher, I don't have the money. So the man said to him, Asbiru ala thaman. I'll wait for the money. The Imam said, Asbiru ala lahm. No, I'll be patient over the meat. I'll wait. There's no reason for me to buy something now on a loan. If you can avoid asking for loans, brothers and sisters, even if it's putting it on the credit card, if you can avoid doing that, do so. And you will see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be the one who answers you every time. Don't ask others. Don't humiliate yourself before others. Because again, asking is a form of humiliation. If you must do so for something that's absolutely necessary, then do so with honor and pride. And ask once and only once. If the person refuses, walk away. Thank you. Don't humiliate yourself. Don't ask again and again and again. In fact, scholars say that if you can live a life where you ask no one for anything, then you should. Glass of water. Bring me this. Get me the pillow. Do that. Drive me there. People sometimes have a habit of doing this. If you can be and lead a life where you ask no one for anything, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not abandon you. An example of that, a very simple example, is imagine if you're on the street, a beggar comes to you and knocks on your car window, right? Most people will not engage with this. They won't feel sympathetic towards the beggar. Why? Because I just saw the beggar knock on that car window and this car window and this car window, and I'm just one car among all of these cars. And I think to myself, well, if I don't help him or her, someone else will, right? Plus, they're there throughout the day and the night. And so, how many car windows are they knocking on? 100 cars, 200 cars, 500 cars? Don't make a living out of it, right? But if someone came to me and I knew that this person has not asked anyone else and will not ask anyone else, will I not be more sympathetic? Will I not help them? If you ask no one but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will answer you. As I read in the hadith of Imam as-Sadiq. فَلْيَيْأَسْ مِنَ النَّاسِ كُلِّهِمْ. Despair, be hopeless towards others, and hopeful only in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Obviously, this includes God's vicegerents, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for instance, He Himself says, وَابْتَغُوا إِلَيْهِ الْوَسِيلَةِ. Seek to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the wasila, the vehicle, the means to reaching Allah. And so again, some of these children who sit on the pulpit, they say, but wasila, this is al-amal salih. These are good deeds, right? وَاسْتَعِينُوا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. Seek help from what? Patience, which is, the commentators of the Quran have said patience means fasting. If you have a problem, a trial, or something you're going through, fast a day. Seek help from fasting. And in praying, pray 2 raka'at. Give the reward to the mother of Imam al-Zaman. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you. وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. Which negates the idea that they say that we can only ask Allah. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. First of all, in your daily life, you ask all kinds of people for all kinds of things. They say, no. But there is this veil of ghaib. Beyond the veil of ghaib, we can't ask anyone. Says who? Show me a verse in the Quran which says that you can only ask people who are on this side of the so-called veil of ghaib, but not on the other side. Where did you come up with this concept from? If you say that Allah says, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, that we should only seek help from Allah exclusively and from no one else, then this applies to this side of the so-called veil and that side of the so-called veil, which you have concocted and made up by yourself. No such expression is found in the Quran or the Hadith. The veil of ghaib. God knows what that means. But, so the absolute should apply to both of these two spheres. The second thing is, Allah Himself says, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. If you say that we can only ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why does Allah say, seek help from salat and fasting? They say, oh no, but this is amal salih. This is a reference to good deeds. وَابْتَغُوا إِلَيْهِ الْوَسِيلَةِ is good deeds. Isn't going back and asking Allah in the name of the Ahlulbayt a good deed in itself? Doesn't the Prophet say, ذِكْرُ عَلِيٍّ what? Ibadah. The mention of the name of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the remembrance of Ali, speaking of the virtues of Ali is an act of worship. Going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and asking Him by the grace of Ali ibn Abi Talib, whose very name is an act of worship, is that not a wasila to Allah? Is that not amal salih? Again, unfortunately, we're dealing with children. We're dealing with absolute moronic idiots with zero qualification in matters of religion who feel that they have every right to express their views. SubhanAllah, the science of religion is the most oppressed science because everybody feels that they're entitled to an opinion on it. No one expresses their views in medicine, in astrophysics, and all of these complicated sciences. But religion, which is our path to Allah, is suddenly an open game and everyone can have an opinion on it. So, you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you ask the vicegerents of Allah that He Himself has appointed. As He says when it comes to istighfar, once again, جَاءُوكَ فَاسْتَغْفَرُوا اللَّهِ. We ask them, that is perfectly acceptable. But to ask other people who are just like me and you, that is something that should be avoided as much as possible. Finally, going back to the sermon of Rasulullah, he says, your sleep is an act of worship. Your prayers are answered. Your anfasukum fihi tasbih amalukum, and your actions are accepted. The Prophet begins with this statement. I left it for last because I think it's so critical and important, which is what? وَأَنفَاسُكُمْ فِيهِ تَسْبِيحٌ. Every time you breathe, it's an act of exaltation. How do we acquire this beyond the holy month of Ramadan? Is there a shortcut for that? Is there something we can do? I'm sure you've guessed that the answer is yes. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. He says, نفس المهموم لظلمنا تسبيح وهمه لنا عبادة. When you breathe, but do so while you're in a state of sadness for the oppression of the Ahlulbayt. The oppression they were subjected to saddens your heart. If you're in that state, every time you breathe, it's an act of exaltation. Your depression for the oppression of the Ahlul Bayt, your sadness, is an act of worship, the Imam says. Brothers and sisters, I want to conclude with this. Right after the holy month of Ramadan is the month of Shawwal. The 8th of the month of Shawwal coincides with what? Who remembers? Yawm al-Baqiyah. It is the day on which the greatest calamity in our modern times was perpetrated against the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. The greatest desecration of the sanctity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet and his family occurred on the 8th of Shawwal, when almost a century ago, a cult that claims to follow the sunnah of Rasulullah attacked the paradise of Baqiyah, Jannatul Baqiyah, and razed those majestic shrines to the ground. Brothers and sisters, we have to be in a state of sadness for this calamity. We have to be depressed for this tragedy that befell the family of the Holy Prophet. Once I was in Baqi'. Baqi' houses Imam al-Hasan al-Mushtaba. If Baqi' was a shrine that we could visit, you would also see 30 million people flocking to his shrine. You would see just as many people paying their respects and saluting the grandson, the son rather of Rasulullah, by going to him just like we go to his brother Abu Abdullah al-Husayn. The desecration of Baqi' is an enduring tragedy. It's an enduring act of oppression against the Ahlul Bayt, which is why it must be honored, which is why this day has to be used as a time to motivate the Shia around the world to defend the Ahlul Bayt, to restore the Baqi' to its former glory. That's why we can't just have a Baqi' day. That's why this year can be turned into a Baqi' year. How is it, brothers and sisters, that we can't allocate 5 minutes a day? 5 minutes for the oppression to which Imam al-Zaman is subjected. 5 minutes to try and find a way to rebuild the cemetery of Baqi'. I'm not saying that you should devote all your life in the service of Imam al-Zaman, which if we did that, we still wouldn't be doing justice to him. Everything we have is because of him and the Ahlul Bayt and Rasulullah. I'm not saying that. 5 minutes is too much. 10 minutes is too much. Use whatever skills you have, whether it's your pen or your tongue or your people skills or the ability to mobilize individuals to go and speak to politicians. If the government of this country, which may be sympathetic with us on certain things, if we can lobby them to push for the reconstruction of Baqi', it might just work. And if it doesn't, at least we tried. If the Shia mobilize around the world, 300 million of us, 500 million of us, and if we count all of the lovers of the Ahlul Bayt, this also includes many Sunnis. But leave them aside. If we as people who follow the Imam of our time, if we mobilize, we might actually be able to do it. It could happen this year, if not this year, the next year. If it's a 20, 30-year project, at least let's work towards it. Because if you do, if you have this concern in your heart, this hum, if you are saddened by this, which also translates into some action, Imam Sadiq says, نَفَسُ الْمَعْمُومِ لِظُلْمِنَا تَسْبِيلٌ وَهَمُّهُ لَنَا عِبَادَةٌ. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us and inspire us to take the blessings of the holy month of Ramadan and stretch them beyond the holy month until the next time. Who knows if we're going to be alive next month of Ramadan? Who knows if we're going to observe another Laylatul Qadr? Who knows if we're going to observe another martyrdom of Amir al-Mu'mineen and a birth of Imam al-Hassan? Who knows? I went to the Qabristan right here in your city. I visited the graves. It's something I have tried to make a habit out of. Wherever I travel, I visit the Qabristan. I visit the living as well as the dead. There's a blessing there. And as I was going through the graves, I noticed that the average age, at least the graves that I saw around me, the average age was about 60 years old. I also saw a 21-year-old. I saw a 25-year-old. Can you guarantee that you'll be alive next year? No, you can't. But we can try and take these blessings and stretch them and use them to refuel our spirituality as long as we can, hoping that we will make it to the next holy month of Ramadan. I will conclude with this, since we're on the subject of being saddened and in a state of grieving over the tragedies of the Ahlulbayt. I mentioned the story of Shatita. When Shatita died a few months after that, this man, An-Nayshaburi, Muhammad ibn Ismail, I think his name was, he said that now everyone recognized the status of Shatita, because the Imam only took her khums and the Imam sent her a shroud. So when she passed away, everyone came out in her funeral. We went out into the desert where we had a cemetery. We dug a grave. We placed her inside her grave. Just before we sealed the grave and poured the soil over her, we saw a man on horseback and he was wearing a mask. We didn't know who it was. He said, stop. He came to her burial site. He said, I wish to do something before she is buried. Then we didn't know who this person was. He took out a pouch from his pocket. And then we noticed that in the pouch there was some soil. He took part of that soil, just a pinch, and he sprayed it on the face of Shatita. We asked him, who are you? He said, I am Musa ibn Ja'far al-Kaaba. Not only did the Imam send her a shroud, tell her when she's going to die, but he came to bury her himself. Not only that, they said, what is this soil that you just sprinkled over her face? He said, هذا تراب قبر الحسين عليه السلام. This is a soil from the grave of Aba Abdullah that I sprinkled over her face so that Allah would welcome her as a guest of His. Now, they then completed the burial in the presence of the infallible Imam. I say, Ya ibn Rasulullah, Ya Musa ibn Ja'far, you did all of this for this woman because she was sincere. And so you ensured that she was buried with honor and dignity. But I know someone, Ya Hujjat Allah, Ya ibn Rasulullah, I know someone who was left on the ground and in the scorching heat of the sun for 3 days. Imam al-Zaman says in Ziyaratul Nahiyah, he says, As-salamu ala man dafanahu ahlul qura. Peace be upon the one who was buried by the villagers. Let me give you an example, Ya mu'mineen, to illustrate how painful this is. Imagine someone lives in a village And when he dies, he has no one to bury him. He has no family, no friends, no one who cares for him. So after 3 days, the villagers come together and they say, let's go bury this man. He's been left on the ground for 3 days. Aywa musibata, aywa ghariba, ya Aba Abdullah. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين.